This is an introduction to epistemology, the study of knowledge, and ontology, the study of being. Now, if you think it's about establishing the existence of God, you're going to be sorely mistaken and disappointed, because all six of the main arguments for establishing the existence of God fail absolutely. However, the methodology that you learn through looking at these arguments will be invaluable to every single thing that you do when you are studying philosophy. We shall begin by looking at the first three of Aquinas' 5 ways. These are all variations on the cosmological argument. They answer the question that Leibniz poses later on: why is there something rather than nothing? These are the kinetological argument, the etiological argument, and the argument from contingency. Now, the easiest way of looking at these is to look at these rather like a child who asks his mother the simple question, "Where did I come from?" "Well, darling, you came from your mother's tummy." And the child thinks for a few minutes and then says, "Where did you come from?" "Oh, I came from Grandmama's tummy." And the child, who's highly intelligent, thinks again and says, "Where did Grandmama come from?" "Ah, she came from Great-Grandmama's tummy." And the thing goes on, and eventually you get to the point where the child says, "And where does the Brontosaurus come from?" And at that point, the mother says, "God!" God is, in the etiological argument, the first cause, because there's a principle, an Aristotelian principle, that you cannot have an infinite regression. If there is cause and effect, there must eventually be a first cause. Same principle in the kinetological argument. If everything is in motion, there must be a first mover. The third way from contingency, Aquinas says that all beings are created, and there must be some being on whom all those depend. That being, he says, is God. Now, the contingency argument is exciting because it moves us away from the idea of a source to the idea of something, of a being that is still in existence today. Rather like a juggler. If a juggler is juggling balls, he needs to continually be there for the balls to remain in motion. Take the juggle away and the balls fall to the earth. The unmoved mover, the first mover, doesn't really need to be more than an amoebic sprat, a bit of protoplasm. It certainly doesn't need to be the God of theology. The first cause, similarly, actually still doesn't need to exist now. But the necessary being, on whom everything else depends, there is a way in which that necessary being must still be here today. Another way to look at the contingency argument is to ask, can I imagine the non-existence of something? Can I imagine the non-existence of myself? Well, yes, there was a time before I was born when I did not exist, and there will be a time after I die when I will not exist. Can I imagine other things like that? Yes, my car, my house, my cat. These things I can imagine when they were not, when they will not be. Now, if everything can be imagined not to exist at some point, then there would be nothing in existence, and nothing can come from nothing. That's the Parmenides line. If nothing comes from nothing, then nothing exists. Clearly, as something does exist, there must be a being that does not operate on these terms. A being whose existence we cannot question. A necessary being. And that being is God. That's the principle of the contingency argument, and that's the idea of a necessary being. However, Kant says about the contingency argument and the idea of necessary existence, that this might be a sneaky way to introduce the principles of the ontological argument into the 5 ways. And the ontological argument fails, says Kant, because we're moving from a definition to reality. And we can't define something into existence, but we'll look at that in the next lesson when we look at the ontological argument. These first 3 arguments have a background in classical philosophy. You can find a version of the cosmological argument in the Timaeus and in the Laws of Plato. You can also find the idea of first cause in the unmoved mover in Aristotle. But with this small caveat, remember Aristotle thinks of an infinite universe. And when he talks about a first cause, he's saying, if you want to believe in a finite universe, and the universe has a beginning, you've got to present an efficient first cause. Plotinus talks about a being, a divine being, presumably, whose existence generates creation. Now, this is later on defined as God. God's purpose is to create. When we come to Islam, one of the most exciting characters is Avicenna, who's famous as a doctor. Indeed, many of his medical practices were still in existence into the 16th century. Now, Avicenna draws a distinction between mahiyat, essence, and wujud, existence. What's the difference between the two? Well, we can talk about the essence of something without necessarily conceding that it exists. We can talk very confidently about what a unicorn would be like if it existed. Now, the mahiyat and the wujud are linked together by the cause, and that cause would be God. The Kalam argument takes this further. The Kalam argument talks about beginnings. If everything has a beginning, then the universe, which is a thing, has a beginning, and that beginning must be God. This is particularly attractive in the 20th century and was revived by William Lane Craig, and seems to tie in with modern ideas of the Big Bang, first identified by Hubble in 1926. But the Big Bang comes with its own problems. For example, we cannot account for the first millisecond after the Big Bang, 10 to the minus 43. And if the Big Bang generates time and space, to ask the question, what was before the Big Bang, is ridiculous. Someone has said it's as ridiculous as asking what is north of the North Pole. The Big Bang cannot be an event if there is no time or space in which it takes place. So there is no before the Big Bang. So the question of whether God is the author of the Big Bang is... There are 4 points that I want to make before we finish. The first is about Occam's razor. Wonderful idea. Entia non sunt multiplicanda praeter necessitatem. Let's not invent things unnecessarily. It's like a child and you say, Tim, where are the toffees that I left on the table this morning? I didn't take them. No, I didn't say you did. Where are they? The rabbit took them. Which rabbit? I don't see any rabbit. Oh, the invisible rabbit. And eventually the invisible rabbit has to go through a door or through a wall to explain why the invisible rabbit is not here anyway. A child's lies increase and become absurd. In the same way, the explanations which we cannot fully explain could increase unnecessarily to a point of absurdity. Now Hume, our second point, Hume would invoke the principle of Occam's razor and say, why not stop at the universe? We can't fully explain the universe. Let's stop there. We don't need to create a being called God to explain this thing, the universe, which we cannot fully account for. Hume says two other things which are important to this discussion. The first is about causation. He says causation is just a convention. That automatically knocks the etiological argument soundly on the head. He also says about analogy. If I have a mother, it might stand to reason that the universe also has a mother. But Hume says these two things, me and the universe, have a different quality of existence. So these are the 3 points he makes. Causation is a convention. There is not necessarily a parallel, an analogy between my mother and the universe. And finally, he would say, he would invoke Occam's razor and say, why not just stop at the universe? That's answer enough. But Richard Swinburne, one of the great Christian writers of the 20th century, uses Occam's razor to say, well, Occam's razor suggests that we should go for the simplest explanation. And God is a simple explanation. Now, thirdly, the idea of quantum physics, which I don't fully understand, I readily admit. Quantum physics seriously knocks the principles of causation, again, on the head. But it also challenges, I believe, the Parmenides principle that nothing can come from nothing. And finally, we could say that the arguments advanced by Aquinas in the Summa Theologica are designed for believers. And maybe in today's world of skepticism and the internet, we're trying to get them to do something that they were never originally intended to do. Now, in the next talk, I'm going to discuss the fourth and the fifth of Aquinas' 5 ways, and also look at Anselm's ontological argument, which is the most thrilling piece of philosophy because it moves us into the realms of abstract thought.